people like Ralph McQuarrie, Jet Green, Chris Evans, Mike Pangrazzo, they're just incredible artists. And I've been lucky enough to speak to most of those people. And I'm still blown away by the sort of sleight of hand that they pulled off with those shots.
Yeah, it's like famously in the asteroid chase, like the ones up front were crafted, but then a lot of the ones in the backs were just potatoes. They just dangle potatoes on wires.
Yeah, well, Ken Ralston, he's got a good sense of humour, and he just said, look, why are we spending weeks like making these perfect asteroids? Nobody's going to see them. We just need to hint as to what they are. And this one looks like a potato. I'm going to put a potato in there.
Just get a sack of spuds.
He put a tennis shoe in a...
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OCAST, your island gateway to all things geek. I'm your host tonight, Cal, and joining me tonight, my ever-loyal co-host, Kieran. What's happening with you?
Not much at the moment, just been busy watching a few anime here and there.
All right, yeah. No, there's worse ways to waste your free time, I suppose. So joining us tonight, if you're in the geek circles, very well known for his fantastic documentaries, which is what we're talking, very unique documentaries as well when I've discovered them, and his fantastic podcast as well on the same subject, the Filmumentaries man himself, Jamie Benning. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you at last.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, we finally managed to do it.
Yeah, this been a protracted negotiation between us. So, I suppose with all good things, a little bit about yourself, your background. So, I take it you were always a lover of these films in particular, and then I don't know too much about your background, but are you into that area, like filmmaking and that yourself? Is that like your background?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I watched movies just like any other kid, and I think it was The Empire Strikes Back that made me realize that movies were made, if you know what I mean. Until then, I'm just receiving them, going to the cinema with my parents and my sister. And it wasn't really until Return of the Jedi, I was age 7 at that point, and I went to see it on the biggest screen you could see it on in the UK, in the Dominion Theatre in London. And on the way out, I was buzzing. I just loved what I was seeing. I was the perfect age for it. And I was allowed to buy a book from this little stand outside. And I chose The Story of book, which was this kind of magazine, red-covered book. My sister bought the Making of book. And I'm looking through it, and there's a few photos in there that I didn't recognize from the film because there's some deleted scenes in there. And then I swapped it with my sister while we were sort of on our way home. And I opened it up and I was like, what's a matte painting? And what's a stop-motion animator? And who's Mike Pangrazzo and who's Phil Tippett and all these names, Ken Ralston. And that was what really turned me on to sort of the behind the scenes stuff. So that set me on a trajectory of just love for movies. And I would go to the movies well up into my 20s twice a week, just try and see everything. It was cheaper then, cinema, in the 90s. And yeah, I then sort of went about later on in my life, in my 20s, going to university, a bit later than some of my classmates. And I did a media production degree. So I wanted to get into film, didn't make it into film, got into TV. So that's where I've been for the last 25 years. But I've always done, since the early 2000s, I've always had things like this on the side, my kind of geek endeavors.
Yeah. And so the Filmumentaries, they're so unique. I don't think there's anything like them before, since, after.
Yeah.
So where did you get this idea of like incorporating the DVD into the documentary, the making of, into the film? Like,
well, I always watched those making ofs and stuff on TV. There was a thing called Movie Magic that was on TV on a Saturday afternoon. I also used to love just the making ofs of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom and Return of the Jedi and Star Wars and everything else. And I always loved those moments where you saw a behind the scenes of a shot you knew well being filmed.
Yeah.
And it looked weird because it was either on a television camera or it was on a 16mm camera. And then they'd cut to the film and suddenly you'd see that magic. And I loved seeing those things side by side. So in the early 2000s, when, yes, you could like rip a DVD and YouTube was kind of coming into its own a little bit, but still there were people like myself that were members of websites swapping video clips. And what was great about that was that on this particular site called originaltrilogy.com, there were people from Germany, Denmark, Spain, France, Australia, Canada, all over the world. And we all had slightly different media in our VHS collections and DVD collections. So what we went about doing was swapping that material. And I saw some footage that was only shown in in Germany from behind the scenes of The Empire Strikes Back. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to make like the ultimate making of by putting all of the material together? Because often what happens is a TV company will be interviewing a star, let's say Mark Hamill, they'll be given a clip, they'll be given some behind the scenes clip, like an EPK, an electronic press kit that goes out to broadcasters. And in some cases, they differed throughout the world. So I found that, if I took 4 seconds from Germany and 4 seconds from the British one, they would literally splice together and give me 8 seconds of material, like seamlessly running.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a puzzle putting all of that together. So I had this idea of putting the film itself on a timeline in Final Cut Pro, and I wanted to learn Final Cut Pro. That was a good thing to get into. I didn't want to do a wedding video or something like that. So I started to make this kind of 2D puzzle, which was the timeline of the film, and then here's a bit about the carbon freezing chamber. Right, that goes there. Here's a bit about the Hoth barrel. That goes there. And then I started getting this almost 3D puzzle because I had multiple different bits and bobs, photos, videos, old interviews, new interviews. And it was then about just trying to find the best material and the most sort of interesting material. And for me as well, it was like trying to find stuff that I knew I'd not really heard before.
Yeah.
And therefore I assumed that other fans hadn't heard before. So I just put these 2-hour plus things together with just about everything I can find. And at the time, I think building Empire, my first one, it used every frame of footage from behind the scenes of Empire Strikes Back that had ever been released. Because I wanted it to be completist, but I also wanted it to be watchable. And that was the idea of watching the film unfold as you're watching it. So yes, we know that line's coming up from Princess Leia, but hang on, this is from the 8mm version. She says it slightly differently because they used a different take. So I just really enjoyed the process, really enjoyed sort of watching it myself. And then I went about making Returning to Jedi on Return of the Jedi. I did Raiding the Lost Ark on Raiders of the Lost Ark, as you might have guessed. And then I did Inside Jaws. Star Wars Begins, before Raiders. Then Raiders, then Jaws, Inside Jaws. Yeah. So the last one I made, what is it now? 2026. That was 2012. So yeah, that was a long time ago, 14 years ago.
Take it they're still getting hits, and obviously people like us are still wanting to talk to you about them. Has that surprised you how they've got this longevity as well?
Yeah, they've got the tail on them as longer than I thought. I mean, at the time, I remember I was weirdly sitting in a hospital waiting room, and I'd been in there for quite some hours, and I turned my phone on to receive like 200 and something emails, and Star Wars Begins had kind of gone viral. This was 2011. So, you're still talking about in the early days of smartphones. iPhone had only been out, 3 or 4 years by that point, and YouTube. And I had emails from people inside Lucasfilm. I had emails from like Heat magazine and Wired magazine, and I ended up being interviewed for the New York Times and stuff. And I had this flurry of interest because people hadn't seen it. They were like, I think the thing was, they were like, where is this from? Is it from a studio? If not, how has this guy done it? Hang on, there's one guy doing this. And I think that story of just one guy doing this over those months and years that it took for some of them, that really interested people. It captured their imagination for a bit.
Because I always wonder, were you ever nervous about the studios? Because I know they can be very iffy with their copyright but it sounds like they all had a very positive feedback to you.
Yeah,
at least they didn't come after you.
Yeah, that's the thing. There was always a chance that the stormtroopers were going to knock my door down, but I was always very explicit about saying that I never earned money on them in any way, and I never did. I mean, I've caught people trying to sell them on DVD and Blu-ray over the years, and I've done my best to stop them on eBay and other places. I never made a single penny, so they were never for profit. And the thing was, back in 2011, Star Wars Begins was on the front page of like Yahoo, and it was in the Daily Telegraph, and it was in what was that? FHM magazine had a thing about it in there.
Okay.
I didn't even have to do a double page spread or anything, and I think that it didn't damage the property in any way, you know? I wasn't making an equivalent product to something that was already out there. I certainly wasn't showing the whole movie. Um, and I think being on Vimeo as well, Vimeo as opposed to YouTube, they were a bit less strict about copyrighted material. And even YouTube actually back then weren't that difficult about copyrighted stuff. But yeah, I think the fact that I've always said that I've never made money, and I never have, and I never will. I could have made thousands because I basically put out into distribution over 500 DVDs of each of those first three, the Star Wars ones, and just let them proliferate. And they were on boards and people were downloading them. So it cost me money to make them at the end of the day. So I think that was one of the things that stood me in good stead for, you know, nobody knocking on my door.
So you've done a filmmentary about Jaws as well.
Yeah.
So what was your experience, finding out the information, to do your filmmentary about Jaws?
Well, I'd done the Raiders one and it'd been pretty successful and I got some really nice feedback. And I was starting to hear from sort of industry insiders a bit more. And then I was approached by a guy called Jim Bella, who is he's not in the industry, but he's just a massive Jaws collector. He used to have a website, I think he still does, jawscollector.com. And he co-wrote that really nice book with Matt Taylor, that Memories from Martha's Vineyard book. And Jim said to me, I've seen your Raiders filmumentary. I'd love you to make one on Jaws. And at that time, I didn't know a huge amount about Jaws. Yes, I knew the stories that everybody knew. And I did used to have it on VHS and DVD, but it wasn't a film where I knew a huge amount about the backstory. So I bought the Jaws log. I rewatched the documentaries and Jim said to me, look, I can help you. I've got photos. I've got contacts. Because one of the things I'd done with the Raiders one is I'd started interviewing people myself, which was a new thing for that one. And on the Jaws one, I must have interviewed 6 or 7 or 8 people, maybe. Voices that you wouldn't normally hear, you know, extras, people with minor speaking roles. One of the kids, I spoke to the kid who gets eaten off of his inflatable Lilo, Jeffrey Voorhees. So that was a different experience again, because each time I did one of these, I wanted to kind of ramp it up. Like with the Empire one, it was about being sort of completist. With the Jedi one, there was already a ton of material about Jedi out there. So I wanted to make that fresh in a way. The Raiders one, I sort of upped the quality. I wanted it to be full HD at the time, and I wanted some nicer graphics and a proper title card. So I got a friend to do a poster, and then with Jaws again, I kind of ramped up again by doing more and more of my own interviews, because that's the other thing as well, is I started to realize that I kind of wanted to make a bit of an archive in a way of these interviews and all of this material. And that's kind of what led me to my podcast ultimately.
That's pretty cool. Because I mean, you mentioned that you spoke to a lot of voices that you would normally hear, such as the kid who unfortunately gets eaten by Jaws.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned like the extras. So, and what was it like just kind of interviewing these people who were like behind the scenes?
Yeah, they were very sort of grateful. I mean, there was a woman called Rita Schmidt who played a nurse in the scene after the shark attack in the pool, where they have to take their kid to the hospital, and the mayor is kind of finally, signing the bill to say the beaches are closed. And she's literally a nurse in it for a few seconds, but she had some wonderful Polaroids of her on the set because she was dating the props guy at the time, and he just got her in for the day. And you can see her in the film, and I've got these wonderful pictures that she sent me of her and Roy Scheider, which had never been seen before. And her and I stayed in contact for years. We send Christmas messages and New Year messages, and that's one of the things I like about doing this stuff. It's the same with my podcast. Is I create relationships with people. It's not just about getting what I need from them, because I'm just intrigued about the industry. I want to hear those stories, and for everybody that goes past on the credits, they've all got a story, right? Every one of them. It might be a no good story, but most of the time it's a pretty good story. And there's also, especially with those films back in the day, not everyone got credited. So there's also thousands of people that worked on those movies that never get the chance to speak. So I like that. I like that kind of ethos, that unsung heroes kind of angle.
It's interesting what you say, like when you first started doing this, like because there's all this big thing about how George Lucas keeps going and changing the films. Was it that's been going on since day one? These films have been changed for nearly every medium and format, isn't it?
Yeah, well, as soon as Star Wars came out again for it was either the 79 or 80 or 81 re-release, he put A New Hope on it for the first time. That was one of the first changes. But even at the time, there was a 70mm version that had a different mix to the 35mm, and then the 8mm version came out at home, and that had different takes in it. It was the same with Empire. Um, the 70mm version, I believe, of Empire didn't even include a few seconds a visual effects shot because it was too late to get it in before the release because that was like a very late added effect. So he's been doing that for a long time, tweaking away. And I remember that sort of barren time of Star Wars between kind of 85 when they stopped making the toys through to the 90s, early 90s, when I would go to Forbidden Planet and I'd pick up a fanzine, a black and white fanzine that had been put together by just geeks that have been pouring through this for years. And then all of that stuff came around with the special editions, and he made more changes there, and then on the Blu-ray. And I've been asked, would I go back and make a special edition of these Filmumentaries because so much more material has come to light and in better quality than I had available at the time. But for me, it was a product of the time. I look at those now and they look kind of clunky, and I know I could do much, much better now. But I decided to sort of knock that format on the head because it was getting to the point where I was getting in conversations with studios about doing them officially. Unfortunately, that didn't transpire after many months of work and planning and stuff. But yeah, I just think, they're products of their time. I made them in the early 2000s. They look like they're from the early 2000s, but they do their job, and I'm still glad that people are watching them every week on Vimeo. I get stats, from dozens of people that are still watching them. So
yeah, and it's got totally global reach, I'm guessing, as well. You've had messages from all kinds of corners of the globe. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean Hebridean, Japanese, German, yeah, all over the place, honestly. And that's what's great. And one of the most delightful things for me was when somebody said they were using it to educate people. They were showing people how you can create a narrative out of disparate sources. Because I used Star Wars Begins, I used something like between 90 and 110 different sources to make that. And it hangs together still pretty well. And this guy, yeah, he told me he was teaching people using that material, and that was great. And the fact that people who worked on the movie had contacted me as well to say, I didn't know this and I didn't know that. I'd never heard this interview. I'd never seen that photo. Where did you find this behind the scenes material? That's great. Yeah. And that's the great thing about having a presence online is getting in those conversations with people, getting that feedback, and always trying to find something new as well.
So you recently hosted a panel for ILM back in 2023.
Yes.
So what was that? What was that like?
Well, that came out of left field a bit. I had started doing some interviews with some ILM or ex-ILM people, and then the head of press got in touch with me from ILM and said, "Look, we love what you're doing. We think you're doing a great podcast. Let us know, and we'll try and get you the people you want to get." So I can't remember. I think I got Dennis Muren through my own means, but then I think maybe Ken Ralston, who was another VFX hero of mine, they got me him, and we started this relationship. And then they said, "Well, look, London is going to be Star Wars Celebration. We'd love for you to come down and host a panel." And I've never done anything like that before in my life. I mean, I do training. I train people how to use equipment in the TV industry. So I might have 6 or 8 or 10 people sometimes for a few days. But I went along to the Excel Centre in London, and I had prepared notes and a few calls, and I'd sort of briefly met each of the participants that were going to be there on a Zoom call. And I was like, right, well, let's find out where this space is, and I went up to this room. I think it was the Twin Sons room or something, and got up there, and there was like seats all the way from left to right, all the way back to front, and this stage in the middle. And this guy was up there, sort of looked like he belonged to the place. I said, "How many seats are in here?" He said, "Oh, it's just over 1,000. I was like, "Well, okay." And that was the day before. The morning of, I walked in there, and I thought I better get up there, with half an hour to go or something, 45 minutes to go. And I before I went up the steps, I looked to my right, and there was just 1,000 people queuing up to come into this thing. Not because of me, but because it was to do with the visual effects and special effects of Andor, the first season. And I just sort of did a lap around the queue and saw a few people I knew, and they wished me luck. And I went up there and was introduced onto the stage by like the MC and, podcaster and filmmaker Jamie Benning. And I kind of ran up the steps and across the stage, and I had this 1 hour clock in front of me, as well as a little monitor showing what was on the big screen next to us. And I introduced each of the guys out, and we just chatted very casually. I'd been doing my podcast for quite some time by this time, a couple of years. And so the conversation flowed very easily, and I was able to do that. What was great, though, was having that audience feedback, which, of course, you don't get on a podcast. So there was laughter, there was, whatever. And it was great getting the laughter. You crack a joke and 1,000 people laugh. You can see why comedians get addicted to that. And then we were showing some good stuff on the screen that hadn't been seen before. And it was a real nice chance to celebrate those artists. They don't get the chance to stand up in front of 1,000 people and get a round of applause, and that's what I invited everybody to do right at the end. I said, look, let's all just give these guys a big round of applause for all their work on Andor. And everybody sort of stood up and clapped their hands, and they were absolutely buzzing afterwards. And it was great to be, a small part of that. I was hoping to do more and more stuff like that over time, but, with a regular job, a podcast, trying to write a book and all of that stuff. So it just got in the way, but I'd definitely be up for it. I did another thing at the BFI last summer, which was a panel called The Star Wars Influence. I was invited by the head of restoration at BFI to do that talk, and we sat there in front of 120 people and just talked about the innovations that happened during that sort of golden era of Star Wars, if you like, those original films. And that went on for about 40 minutes, an hour, and that was great as well. I do enjoy that kind of stuff, because for me it's about not just hearing these stories, it's about getting them out there.
Yeah, and I'm suppose you mentioned Nick Tippett, Murin, all those names, and I'm always thinking we've kind of come to a generation now, like, because it's all green screened and we've lost so much of that, like having a army of talent just working with their hands to create this. It's a bit sad in a way, that kind of, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, I still really appreciate that the people using today's tools are artists, and I went to ILM Vancouver recently, and I got to see some of the people working there and some of the work they were working on. And it is amazing what they do with the tools they've got. But for me, there is just something particularly interesting about that tangible time. I was looking through some photos in the ILM archive with a colleague of mine today about an article I'm going to write soon about Enemy Mine. I don't know if you remember that movie. Wolfgang Peterson directed it, and we're going through some behind the scenes stuff that's just been buried in the archive, which my colleague has recently digitized, and it's great. I just love I could pore over these photos all day, because you see these technicians and these artists, they're making models, they're wearing like funky old Revenge of the Jedi t-shirts, or and they've got posters on the wall that's pop culture of the time, from the mid 80s, and they're just these snapshots of a particular time. That's what I find interesting, is looking around, what tools are they using, like what paints are they using, where's their reference material. Whereas now you don't have that sort of collaborative space as such. They're in booths. Yes, they interact with each other, they jump on Zoom calls, they have in-person meetings, but there's not this like multiple hands on one item and crafting it. There is something lost, but
or they're not like told we need this on the screen, and then they're going, how on earth do we pull that off with models and matte paintings? Kind of something like the Battle of Endor, which still astounds me. That shot when all those TIE fighters, how did they do that with those models? I can't get my head around it still.
I know. I was saying exactly the same today to my colleague, because there was a shot of them using a motion control system, and you could see all of the X, Y, and Z axes and all of the counters and the track and everything. And you just think, being able to pre-visualize that in your head with nothing but your imagination, and then program that to do what it needed to do, and having to repeat those steps again and again to get all those multiple passes. Now, though, I think, you take the extra leap into CG VFX, where they're trying to invent new tools to shortcut certain things, like, using materials and smoke and fire. It isn't just a matter of ticking a box and it coming on. Those things have to be really heavily crafted as well. But for me, there's something about that, using your hands, rather than using a mouse to click,
Yeah, it really tested people's creativity back in the day. And I think back in the day.
Back in day. Back in day.
From up north.
As he sips his cup of tea.
Right, where was I going? Oh yes, back in the day. So really test people's creativity with like as you mentioned, like limited resources, what they would have had back then. And I think one of the more interesting things is not as well as the TIE fighters moving, but the scene. I think it's from the Return of the Jedi. It's the one where the Emperor's coming off of the shuttle, and you have this zoomed out view of the shuttle bay, and you see all these stormtroopers and imperial officers and everything. And that is all painted on.
Yeah, so they shot that in the biggest stage at Elstree at the time, and shot it, right up in the rafters. And then a wonderful artist by the name of Michael Pangrazio would have painted the rest of it. And I was saying this just today to my ILM colleague, that when you post about matte paintings, there's always several thousand people going, "Oh my God, I didn't know that was a painting. How could that be a painting?" And you buy those shots so easily. What was clever about those shots with, matte paintings way back, they were just a painting to go to a wide shot to show you where you were. But then in those days, from Star Wars, I mean, they did it in Mary Poppins as well, but you would integrate live action elements. So the eye is drawn to that. So you're not looking at all that peripheral stuff. And I've been lucky enough to see some of those paintings up close and in the archive, and they are really rough where they don't need to be really tight, and they're really tight where they need to be tight, because those guys and girls knew what they had to do in the time they had with the budget they had to trick the camera into, that's a touch of light there. People like Ralph McQuarrie, Jet Green, Chris Evans, Mike Pangrazio, they're just incredible artists. And I've been lucky enough to speak to most of those people. And I'm still blown away by the sort of sleight of hand that they pulled off with those shots.
Yeah, it's like famously in the asteroid chase, like the ones up front were crafted, but then a lot of the ones at the backs were just potatoes. They just dangled.
Yeah, well, Ken Ralston, he's got a good sense of humor, and he just said, "Look, why are we spending weeks like making these perfect asteroids? Nobody's going to see them. We just need to hint as to what they are. And this one looks like a potato. I'm going to put a potato in there." He did it. He put a tennis shoe in. He put a Nike shoe in Return of the Jedi as well. It shoots past at one point. You just wouldn't notice it unless you were looking at, maybe in these new 4K transfers that are on the way. Maybe we'll see it.
Because the other one that reminds me of is the famous opening to Blade Runner, where they said there's only 2 or 3 models, of the city at the start, and the rest's just lumps of plastic because you don't really need to see them.
Yeah, and what really sells those shots is, amazing models, but also just the atmosphere that was dropped in there. They would burn all sorts of waxes and rubbers and things, which you can't do today because of people's lungs. But that was what created that atmosphere, that density, that shot. And those shots are still amazing. I saw Blade Runner on the big screen about 5 years ago again. And I'm always like, wow, this was like 1981 they were doing that. It's crazy.
I need to watch Blade Runner again at some point. I used to have it on DVD. The other thing that came to mind with using tricks of the light was, I think it was a famous Charlie Chaplin scene where they kind of utilized various cutouts of different objects and windows from the background to the foreground, because it was one that was meant to replicate him falling through into the lower floor, even though the distance between him and the floor is pretty much that. But they had all these layers with the camera angled at a certain degree, which made it look deeper than it actually was.
Yeah, I love all that ingenuity, that in-camera stuff. I still think if you can capture stuff in camera as much as you can capture in camera, the better, really. The guys, going back to those guys who worked on Andor, they were telling me that, they shot extensively at a dam.
Yes,
was it in Scotland? Or was it
I can't
Wales?
remember one.
It was in Scotland, yeah. And they were saying to me, that even if they change 90% of that shot, to have a genuine shot to ground the shot and then map over it was so much more valuable than just having a blue screen or a green screen or, an empty field or whatever. Just something to sort of attach the effects too not only help them, but it helps to sell it to the audience. So those sort of that ethos of trying to capture as much in camera is still a really important one. Like the special effects guys on Andor, they would, if they were flipping a car, for instance, or a speeder, as they do in one sequence, the smoke and the pyros that went off weren't enough, but the style of them was replicated with CG, so that it all hung together. Yeah,
Yeah, they get that nice
exactly.
baseline to base it off, whereas it's just green screen. You
Yeah,
don't know what the baseline is.
yeah, exactly.
We've got a question from Mr. Jeebus on the live chat. This rarely happens. Does Jamie think with each generation of effects, from trick photography through special effects to CGI and now AI, that movies have lost the ties to reality within sci-fi, and with it, the charm?
I mean, I think charm comes with nostalgia to a certain extent. So maybe we'll be charmed by the things we're looking at now in the cinema in another 20 or 30 years. Um, do I think something has been lost? I mean, we just kind of answered that in a way, really, I think. For me, the story of, Peter Coran telling me, and he's told his story many times, how he made the title The Thing for The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, where he cut out the letters and used a bin bag and a fish tank full of smoke and all of that stuff. That is a much better story than saying I used this plugin or that plugin. It's not. I love the stories ultimately. The result, I think there's some amazing CG out there at the moment. I recently saw Marty Supreme. It's fantastic. It is so fast paced, so kinetic. I did not notice one visual effect, which goes to say that the work was brilliant. Also, the filmmaking, VFX being a part of that, of course, was so well done that there was not time for me to sit there and scrutinize. I want to go and see it again in a way, just to kind of pick holes in it. So there's definitely amazing work out there. As far as AI is concerned, I mean, there's some crazy stuff in the Star Wars space at the moment coming out with some of the Luke Skywalker tales and in between film tales that are coming out.
Yeah, I've watched a few of them. It's I don't know what to think of them. It looks really good,
Yeah.
but it's also a bit unnerving that they're pulling this off. So
Yeah, there's still that uncanny nature about it, isn't there? Did you see the one of Luke climbing up the canyon and stuff? Have you seen
no,
that
the
one?
one I saw was Vader visiting Padme's grave after
Oh, right, I haven't seen
and
that one.
it's flashing through images. I know it's just really well done, but it's just still doesn't sit right with me. Kind of.
No, I mean, I saw one the other day that's got very, very good likeness of Mark Hamill until he speaks, and there's quite a good likeness of Leia. She looks a bit weird around the cheeks, but until she speaks. But this has happened in a matter of months. We've got to this stage. I mean, goodness knows where we're going to be in another 12 months, 18 months, few years, 5 years down the line.
There's a good chance that, if that is like all created just by generative AI, that's also arguably stolen content, because when I think Cam just mentioned when Vader was visiting Padme's grave, that's a thing that happens in the comics. Prior to Disney taking over, a lot of what a lot of people had to rely on were the old Star Wars, now extended universe comics.
Yeah,
And one of them
yeah.
did involve, it was like within the first few months of Vader being Vader, he goes back to Naboo, visits her grave, and all that. And they also did a lot of comics based off of the after Return of the Jedi, in between them and the Yuzhong Vong War, which I doubt will even be touched by the new generation of Star Wars films.
Yeah, I never really got involved in any of the sort of expanded universes and in between comics and stuff. But what I will say about the use of, Mark Hamill's likeness for a start, he hasn't given permission. Disney haven't given permission for the use of their, intellectual property. So it's it's not a murky area for me. It's fairly black and white, But again, this is coming from somebody who made, 3 feature-length documentaries without copyright. So, so what have I got to say? But I think, the problem with AI for me is there's sort of two moral questions in a way. One is about using people's likenesses and people's artwork to kind of scrape from, and the second thing is the use of natural resources, which is crazy. I think AI is using now as much as some countries are using on an annual basis, just to make Donald Trump dance around in the White House or whatever it might be, and it's kind of depressing.
Or the other one that turns up a lot is the Back to the Future 4 trailer. That's been made to death with
Yeah,
AI.
yeah.
And it's always Robert Downey Jr. as Doc Brown and
How would
Tom
that work?
Holland
Tom
as
Holland,
Marty,
yeah.
as Marty Mc. It does work, but
Oh,
though the guys who made that film said no more. There's no more no, that's it. It is done. Kinda.
I'd rather use my imagination, do you know what I mean? And just think about it than see some weirdly uncanny rendered version in front of me. But there you go. But, I think going forward, VFX companies have to embrace AI because it's going to be a way for them to potentially shortcut some of their processes, like some of the processes they went through on Indiana Jones 5, some of the de-aging stuff. That technology has leapt massively forward since then because of AI. But yeah, maybe a bit of the charm has been lost, to answer your question, Mr. Jeebus.
Yeah, because we're missing out on what must have been in the making of these. Like we were speaking about Roger Christian earlier. He designed that lightsaber handle, and then that gets turned over. They do the choreography on set. Then there's the ILM rotoscope, and then there's Ben Burt's sound. They must miss out on that whole slowly coming together to make this bit of magic happen. And they probably didn't even know, is this going to work, until they saw that final scene.
Yeah, and I think you said the word right, though, slowly coming together. I think that's the problem now. Things have got to be out on, the cinema or on Netflix within 5 minutes these days. There's so much media out there. You're fighting for a much smaller space of time. When I was a kid, you go to the cinema, you pick between 3 or 4 films. And that would be for a few weeks sometimes, you to go and see. I remember when I went to see Superman 2, I think the other film, maybe Condor Man was on, and The Rescuers and something else. And it was just those 4 films, These days we're competing with so many channels, so many streamers. Yeah.
And not only that, once you watch the film, they said, "Oh, we've got 5 more of these, and a TV show and an anime, and you've got to
And then
watch
a
all of them
spin-off.
to make sense of this film."
Yeah. Well, it's our fault. Geek culture has made that happen,
Yeah.
It doesn't happen without the customers at the other end.
Yeah, that's true. But you can't with these big companies, they seem to confuse. I mean, sorry, they confuse. They do this on purpose because they're in it for the profit. But they seem to confuse quality over quantity, or they prefer quantity over quality. Just because you're churning something out, out of a cloning machine 24/7, doesn't mean each individual thing is going to be very high quality stuff. It takes time to produce a high quality product.
Yeah. I think I still really support indie cinema because there's some amazing movies that are still coming out. Obviously, they get buried quite often by these big tentpole movies. And obviously, cinemas are closing. My one down the road closed last year, which I was very annoyed about. So I do try and support that kind of more considered, slower filmmaking process as much as I can. Whether it's buying it when it comes out in physical media, or if it's streaming, or going to a premiere or a Q&A, or watching short film festivals and things like that. Because I think, we're probably only a few years away from losing cinemas, most cinemas. I think there'll just be very rare things in another decade. And I want to make sure I do the best that I can, because once they're gone, it's not coming
I
back.
think there was some commentator saying it's just in a few years, it'll just be your Marvel films and Avatar and a few other blockbusters, and that'll be it. That you won't get these kind of big variations of films that we used to have in the cinema.
Isn't it funny, though, that, since the democratization of filmmaking in terms of the tools being, relatively cheap, like we've all got a filmmaking tool in our pocket, that the range of films has diminished to such a point where, I was going to go to the cinema tomorrow. I got a day off tomorrow. And I was like, well, I've seen that one. Oh, that's all there's on at that cinema. They're just doing 9 screenings of each of them. So yeah, I think maybe we need to really focus. This is the other thing, of course, right? Content now isn't long form. I know a lot of people are my age, and I'm 50 this year, and a lot of people younger than me as well saying, I can't even sit through a film anymore. It's too long. they're so addicted to their phones that they're just, they can't be without their device for more than minutes at a time. So I just wish that, we could get back to a space where people do. I haven't even got mine here. I can't do that joke along with you. I'm a professional. But yeah, I think I'd love to see more people having a go at trying to craft a feature film using those kind of tools that we've all got now.
Yeah, because it's like I point out to many people, I am not anti CGI because I can give one good. It's just how it's used, and it's something myself and Kira spoke with Stranger Things. Did you see the end of Stranger Things, Jamie?
I haven't yet. I'm saving it up, for when I've got a time to watch them all. Yeah.
I went back and researched, like, season 1 of Stranger Things cost $50 million over 9 episodes, which is nothing. That whole budget for that first season is 1 episode of the latest one. And it looks so much worse now. It's like we were saying, it's so bright and, the edges of the CGI creatures, whereas like the first it was darkly lit, it was mysterious, and it looks so much better. Just, it's not about the CGI, it's just like, how are they doing, how are they using it? And yeah, it's like people always say, oh, you're just anti-CGI and anti-progress. Well, just anti these tools not being used to their maximum. Like.
I always defer to Todd Vaziri, who's ILM visual effects guy, who's very knowledgeable about all of this stuff. And I think also I've heard in recent years some VFX people biting back when people say, "Oh, the effects were terrible in that film," and they're like, "Well, this is not ILM, by the way. This is a smaller effects house." This guy said, "Well, I had 4 weeks to do 7 shots. This was the budget. It was tiny, and they wanted, results now. That's why the effect shots are rubbish." I'm not saying that's the case with Stranger Things. I haven't seen it. I'm wondering if maybe it was brighter and stuff because they wanted to appeal to a wider audience and maybe drop the rating. And
yeah, I have no idea. It just doesn't look great. It's like when they're in the Upside Down now, it's so bright. And when they're facing these creatures, like it was so dark and moody to begin with. And again, I don't know.
It doesn't fit the narrative that they were trying to portray.
Right.
And
right.
It's also that they had, was it 4 years to make season 5? So like you're wondering, and it's such a big budget bloat on that.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it and have a look and compare and contrast.
Yeah, we've got our reaction video prepared for that as well.
So, Kieran, you're reading the questions tonight?
Yeah. So we've got another one from Mischievous. So they're just remarking on, as a kid in 1993, I remember being in awe of the visual effects in Jurassic Park. What was the most interesting thing Jamie found out when making Jurassic Park episode 64?
Yeah, I spoke to Steve Spaz, in inverted commas, Williams, who's a bit of a renegade from the ILM 90s. I remember seeing Jurassic Park 2, in 93. I was in the first year of sixth form, I think, at the time. So I would have been 16, 17. And I remember going to see it. And I was never a fan of horror movies. I had a buddy who loved horror movies, and I was a bit of a scaredy cat. And I have to say that when that scene happens with the T-Rex and it escapes the compound, I clenched my armrests to the point where my knuckles went white, and I sort of held my breath. And that amazing sound design by Gary Rydstrom, the roars of the dinosaurs. I mean, it's become sort of cliche now in a way, but at the time it was incredible. So speaking to Spaz, that was quite an interesting process. He's had his ups and downs in life and his issues. I don't know if you've seen Jurassic Park. It's a good little documentary about how he was this renegade effects guy that sort of went against management to make this CG dinosaur and then try and sell the idea to the powers that be. We all have our own stories. I've spoken to other people who say it wasn't quite like that, and he got his moment in the limelight to talk about it, and he also was in Light and Magic, the official ILM documentary. He is an important part of history, but just the most interesting thing in talking to Spaz was just finding out, like, he's really good mates with what's his name, who played the T-1000 in Terminator 2. His name, Robert Patrick. They're good mates, and he nearly got me Robert Patrick on the podcast. But Spaz would just ring me up randomly for months there. He would just call me and I'd be like, "Oh, hello, it's Spaz. Hello, mate." And we just have a chat for a while. He has had some issues with alcohol and stuff, as he shows in his documentary. So he does go off on a rant sometimes about why he's not been sort of rewarded. But I think that film, that documentary he did, has sort of, put that to rest a little bit for him. I think, Jurassic Park, that particularly that sequence with the T-Rex, I can still watch that and I am still blown away about how they pulled that off. 1993, I mean, that's a bloody long time ago now, but there's something in the compositing of that shot with the rain, how the beast looks kind of shiny with the rain falling on it and its foot goes in that puddle. It's again, that sequence is that combination of all those different tools that were available at the time, practical Stan Winston Studios, and the early ILM CG stuff. It is incredible. I showed my 10-year-old, she's now 11 actually, I showed her a bit of Jurassic Park the other week, just the reveal of the brontosauruses. And she loves a dinosaur. So she was like, wow, that looks so cool. I mean, it's an old movie, you know. When I was 10, 11, when would that have been? 1986. And we're talking about a 30-odd-year-old movie. But let's talk about watching a film from the 50s and thinking it was great. I would never have done that.
Yeah. If you'd watched like Forbidden Planet or something, you wouldn't exactly be blown away by it. But it's interesting with Jurassic Park because there's only like a handful of CGI shots in that film, and everyone still thinks of it as the first big CGI movie, which it really wasn't. It was just like the few shots they had were so stunning. Like,
yeah, just a few months later, they were working on Casper, which had something like 300 odd CG shots, and they had to they had to make characters that could talk, that were believable characters that could emote. That was in a way just as big a step. But then ILM have always endeavored to do that. They're always reaching for the next level. Their work is always blowing me away.
So just 3 or 4 years, I know we've got to say his name, but Jar Jar was created, and regardless of what you think, that was just incredible. Like what they pulled off there.
Yeah. And that I look back at now at The Phantom Menace, and it looks more filmic than the other movies, the other two, because they shot it on film. But there's some amazing work in that. There's some amazing miniatures in that as well. Some of the pod racing stuff that Lorne Peterson and his team did, and people just go, oh, it's just crap CG. No, it's not. It's actually got some really, really good work in there. I don't particularly like the film. I think the script is a bit wonky, but we could fill a whole podcast with that, fellas. So,
because and who's the production? Was it Peter Chang? Wasn't it? Is that the guy's name?
Doug Chang.
Doug Chang. Yeah, he doesn't get enough credit for the work he did.
No, he's amazing. Actually, there's a book that's just come out recently by Alexandre Poncet and his colleague, whose name just escapes me for a moment. He's a guy I had on the podcast as well. He made a documentary about Phil Tippett, and he's just released this Doug Chang book, which has got all of his designs and concepts in it. His work is incredible, and I can listen to him talk. I saw him. Did I see him at Celebration? I think. Yeah, I did, and I just saw him giving a talk, and he's like. It's like being able to talk to Ralph McQuarrie in a way. He's that next generation, his designs will live on for a long time.
I think we've got any more Ralph McQuarries or Doug Changs at the moment doing great production designs, because I just feel like so much, it looks so similar, a lot of it.
That's the problem is, I think, when it's like music in a way, isn't it? You get to a certain age and you think, I've heard it all now. It's very unlikely that you're going to hear a track that kind of blows you away anymore. And I think one of the issues with, going back to what we were talking about earlier with designers and concept designers in particular, they're no longer sitting there with a blank page quite often. They're going on Google and they're going through resources to take elements and kind of, kit bash them together. So it then therefore ends up being derivative by its very nature. But that's the train they're on. They have to get that work done. I spoke to another production designer who worked on Wicked. His name will come to me in a minute. And he was saying that, he worked on some of the Nolan Batmans, and he said they went to a toy store and they just, Nathan Crowley, they went to a toy store and just bought all these toys and started making the Batmobile by cramming this stuff together. So therefore, they're taking inspiration from multiple places to make this new object, I suppose. And I guess in a way that's no different to what Nilo Rodis Jamiro and Joe Johnston and all those guys were doing back in the day on the Star Wars movies. They were looking at industrial designers. They were inspired by other industrial designers to create those spaceships and the speeder bikes and the snow speeders and all of that kind of stuff. But they had time. That's the difference. Nilo was telling me, I saw him a few weeks ago. He was telling me that when he was employed on Empire, there was George, Gary Kurtz, Joe Johnston, Ralph Quarry, Ben Burt, and him. There were 6 people on that film for months. And he was just left to come up, right, there's this snow battle. I want these big heavy machines to be fighting the rebels. They're outnumbered, they're out-teched, just design me some stuff. And they went through hundreds and hundreds of iterations of this stuff. And that's what was great about that early work that George did with all those people at ILM and Lucasfilm, that there was a certain time to do it. There was a certain time span, which was longer than what people get now. I spoke to Tim Rose, who did Admiral Akbar. He worked on the animatronics and he puppeteered him. When he came back to do the sequels, he didn't even get any rehearsal time. They had weeks and weeks of rehearsal time on Return of the Jedi. And he said, I just turned up and I had to do it. And I said, the eyes aren't right. We need to. And they said, no, we're shooting, go. And he was in and out within a matter of days. And he, wasn't happy with the performance. That's nothing against Lucasfilm. That's nothing against modern filmmaking. It's just the way it is now, because films don't have that same lifespan as they had back then,
Yeah, just the industry machine as it is now.
Yeah.
Everything feels like everything has to be rushed to get out of there. And that's just, again, I think that's just purely based on the people at the top.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from, when the studio systems broke down, you had executives step in who weren't creative people. And, we saw the results of some of that stuff later in the 80s when people were trying to replicate the stuff that George and everyone else had done. So, yeah.
Well, perhaps the most famous example was, I think it was just not long after Disney bought Star Wars, and one of the Disney executives, and he'd had the big screen behind him, and it was just a timeline of this is what's going to happen now on these dates. And you're already thinking, yeah, this is production line now. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, we should never pretend that filmmaking has ever been anything other than a money-making machine. It always has been. But I think, when people like Coppola and Coppola and Lucas and Spielberg and all those guys were coming up, they saw a gap, that needed filling. Whereas now, like I said, with so many platforms, so many outlets, so little time, so much merchandise, they have to get it out there quickly and make sure they get as much eyes on it as possible. The stuff that I'm doing, just from a podcast point of view, even if I'd started this 10 years ago, I think it would be much bigger than it is, because there weren't as many things like it out there. Unfortunately, now there are thousands of people doing what I'm trying to do, tens of thousands. So, your stuff gets buried.
Yeah, like how many, I don't know, 10 reasons this movie sucks.
Oh, yeah,
You
you're
see on YouTube every.
Oh, definitely, like your Watch Mojo. That comes to mind.
I think, well, that's another thing, isn't it? Back in the day, the only people that really got to talk about movies were movie critics. Now everybody is a movie critic. Everybody has a voice. And that is a method of market research in its own way, isn't it? We're making sort of production companies move the goalposts to sort of fill our every need. Whereas I'd much rather just something lands out of nowhere. That's what really struck me about seeing Star Wars on 35mm at the BFI last summer at their Film on Film Festival, the original film. It looked like a funky, weird 70s movie. And that's what I want it to be, and I think that it's really important to remember that it did come out of nowhere. And we need to sort of foster an environment and an industry where stuff like that can just come out of nowhere and surprise people rather than ticking boxes.
Oh, yeah.
The last film I had that surprised me. Have you ever seen Coherence? The 2013 film.
Don't think so.
It's just a bunch of people at a dinner party, and then I don't want to give anything away in case you haven't seen it.
I'm going to write it down.
We actually had the director on the show, and if you ever watch it, he's well worth talking to.
All right.
it's a film he made for like $20,000 in his own house in 10 days with no script. And it starts off, it's a dinner party full of very American middle class obnoxious people. And then it starts delving into quantum realities, alternate realities and all this. I won't give anything else away, but and I said, that's just a tiny little film, but just a neat idea. And I'd probably say Moon was the other one also that just thought, this feels like proper
Duncan Jones. Yeah.
Filmmaking craft going on here. Kind of.
I'm just going on Google here because I wanted to remember the name of a film. That was it, Primer. Do you ever see Primer?
Yeah.
Four Friends, the time travel movie. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, it looks horrible. It's shot on very old video cameras, but
it's just the idea,
just the
was
concept.
So
yeah. And I love stuff like that.
Primer, Cube's another one that blew me away at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just these kind of, and there's such a market, I think, that's not being used for these kind of small sci-fi, low budget, just rich in idea kind of movies.
Yeah, that's why I'm always, like I said, trying to support film festivals and things like that. I always go up to the BFI film festivals and, pay my money and try and support filmmakers because, it's the art form. It's like Walter Murch said to me, it's the most complete art form. It's sound, it's vision, it's all of the other things, put together, and it's light, it's everything else, music. So, yeah, I want to support it as much as possible. So stop torrenting films, people.
Yeah, just when it all comes together, it can just create something you can't get anywhere else, can't it?
Well, I think the thing is as well, we've got to remember that these films we're still talking about 40, 50 years later. The reason we're still talking about them is because they really are the creme de la creme of what was put out at the time. And there's some atrocious movies that also came out around that time that have been buried forever, thankfully. But, and it's not their fault in a way that everybody has tried to replicate that model, for the preceding decades. But, I do like to go back sometimes and watch some of those movies that were really crappy and tried to pull it off in the same way.
If you just watch E.T. and then watch Maccabee straight after.
Yeah.
There's an old sort of nostalgia itch you get from watching old crappy, 80s, 90s, films and TV series, which just use these old style, forms of just how it looks. And no matter how crappy or how cheesy it looks, it hits that nostalgia itch you have.
Oh, big time. I mean, I like I said, I'm 50, so I'm very aware of that. I grew up in that heyday of VHS, and I used to go to the local VHS store. We used to have a guy that came around in a van as well that would rent VHSs, sorry. And he'd say to me, "Oh, you liked that film with Chewbacca in it? Was it? Oh, Star Wars, yeah. You might like this film, Bigfoot and the Hendersons, And his curation was terrible. Or he'd say, "Oh, have you seen Time Bandits?" Yeah, okay, got Time Bandits. And then he'd say, "Oh, you might like this one as well." And he'd give me like Trolls 2 or something So I watched some really weird, wonky stuff thanks to him. And also just being at the video shop, and the thing you wanted wasn't available. So the guy or girl behind the desk was watching something. You go, "Have you got that?" And they go, "Yeah, we've got 2 copies here. You go, you can borrow this one." Just that discovery of films. And then I spent the 90s. I had a TV and a VHS recorder in my bedroom. I spent the 90s just recording stuff off TV, like a Kurosawa season on Channel 4 or a Scorsese season or David Fincher. That's how I sort of really fell in love with, things outside of Star Wars and Raiders and Jaws and all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just remembering taping off the TV, and then on ITV they would have RoboCop, and you get the infamous ITV edit of RoboCop.
Yeah.
You bad mother crusher and all that kind of stuff.
Didn't he say fun you when he was shooting him?
No, it was why me? Why me?
Why me? Why? But that's the thing. Like a while ago, I mean, my eldest is 20 now, but when she was about 5, I said, "Oh, they're showing Back to the Future up at the O2. We're going to go. I'm going to pick you up from school." And of course, I sort of grew up watching it on the TV cut, where they got rid of a few swear words and a little bit of violence and some slightly wonky sexual stuff potentially. And I was sitting there going, "Oh yeah, this is not really like a kids' movie is these days." Because kids' movies these days, they're mostly talking animals or animated. There's hardly any live action kids movies these days, really. Yeah, so that was a bit of a shock when I saw Marty McFly swearing, and and the same with the Goonies. I was like, wow, there's guns, there's violence. Wow.
I mean, I think that's why Stranger Things hit so much, was it because it reminded folks so much of the Goonies, like
Yeah.
kids behaving like kids. Like,
Yes.
I feel like kids' movies they don't respect kids enough now when they make films. I feel
Yeah.
to say you kids like to be scared. Like, it's okay to scare them a little bit.
I was watching something the other week with my daughter, and I just thought, kids don't talk like that. The adults are putting words in their mouths. The last thing I thought really sort of captured kids' stuff quite well was that Skeleton Crew series, the Star Wars one.
Yeah.
I thought that was really nice, actually. We watched that every week. It came out on a Wednesday or whatever it was, and we watched it after school. And we got quite into that because that felt like the kids could be kids, and they were in this difficult situation. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I mean, that's another one that anime kind of has a certain anime, if not a lot of anime, struggles with if it has any like kid characters, especially between like the ages of 10 and 12. They, even though they are kind of portrayed as kids, and there's some part of the personalities and the way they behave is kind of kid-ish, you still like you're dealing with an adult there. But there's one exception. And that is specifically to one character. It's from Spy Family. So this main kid character is a little girl called Anya, and the main reason why she comes off as a kid in general compared to any other characters is because her personality quirks and mannerisms are based off of the mangaka's own daughter. So I think that's quite neat because it's kind of refreshing. You see this little kid character in anime, you're like, oh, okay, they're probably going to think like an adult. No, they act and sound like a child, and it's just endearing. It's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, my kids do random stuff every day. Like, earlier on, I just turned around and my daughter was running towards me. She just said, catch me. And I sort of catch her. And then she's like pretending to bite my neck and stuff. So, and 5 minutes later, we were having dinner and she was sitting there humming a song, So I just think people have to sort of observe what goes on around them with people rather than hem everybody in. Yeah.
All right. We're coming up to the end here. So I don't know if you know how we end these shows. We usually have a little bit of trivia. So seeing as you've done making ofs, I thought we'd dive into the behind the scenes of a few films and test your knowledge.
Oh,
so
my memory's terrible.
So I've got like 10 questions lined up. So what specific malfunction in the mechanical shark forced Spielberg to shoot many Jaws scenes from the shark's POV instead of showing Bruce? What's the specific breakdown?
Well, they didn't test it in salt water and all the electronics died,
Yeah, it's basically the pneumatics seized.
Yeah.
Okay, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, what unexpected real-world issue caused the famous sword v gunfight to be rewritten on the day?
Well, Harrison had a dodgy tummy and said, let me just shoot him. Well, interestingly, Harrison says he came up with that idea, but also Steven says he came up with that idea. And I think they've settled on we both came up with the idea at the same time.
So what was the name of the motion control system developed by ILM for Star Wars, and why was it revolutionary?
The Dijkstra Flex. And it was revolutionary because you could repeat the same moves for multiple passes to add engine glows and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, lighting passes.
It was basically the exact same pass over and over.
Exactly the same pass, yeah. Which still blows my mind.
In Jaws, what material was used to create the cloudy blood bloom effect when the shark attacks?
What material?
Yeah, or materials, I should say.
I know they definitely used some real guts and blood from a local butcher, because I remember the kid who played the Kittner kid was telling me that it was horrific and stank. But you might have a different answer. Go on.
Yeah. It's food dye and milk. So
okay.
That gives it that kind of cloudy effect, and it disperses quickly.
That's not in my brain, but I must have read it somewhere, I'm sure.
So what real-world location doubled as the exterior for the Tanis dig site in Raiders of the Lost Ark?
I should know that, shouldn't I? Real world. Well, it was in Tunisia.
That's half of the answer.
Go on, tell me.
La Rochelle.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood the question. Yeah, I knew it was La Rochelle. That's where they shot the submarine stuff. Yeah, with the submarine from Das Boot.
All right. This is quite an easy one. In Empire Strikes Back, what technique was used to create the illusion of the massive AT-AT walkers on Hoth?
Stop motion animation.
That's a home run, that one. What unusual material was used to create the sound of the boulder rolling forward towards Indy in Raiders?
I do know this probably in the depths of my brain somewhere. I've spoken to Mark Mangini a few times, who worked on the film and was part of the Oscar team. Yeah, it's gone.
It was a Honda Civic driving slowly over gravel layered with a low-frequency rumble.
That's right. So, yeah, so they drove. I think they were in Lucas Valley, where they eventually built Skywalker Ranch, and they opened the door and just hung a mic out of it crunching over the gravel. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the sound was just Ben Burt saying, "Oh, that's good. Just let me record that."
Yeah. I still would love to talk to him. That's a bit of a dream one day, but I would ask him questions that he's not been asked before. That's my deal.
All right. This is an easy one. In Jaws,
don't say it's easy until I've.
Yeah, all right. Until you've hit the home run. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Jaws, what was the purpose of the platform shark, and how did it differ from the main mechanical shark?
Well, they actually had 3 sharks. They had one going right to left, one going left to right, and one that they could tow. Yeah.
And
but
yeah, it's basically just for close-ups and just for leaking out the water, wasn't it? Mostly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. What specific camera technique was used in Star Wars to make the Star Destroyer so huge in the opening shot?
It was using. Well, they shot different miniatures and then resized them in optical compositing, but
forced perspective, basically.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because I think they're both the same size. The models are like the Star Destroyer is actually smaller than.
Well, in the opening shot of Star Wars, when the Star Destroyer goes over and the blockade runner's there, the blockade runner is bigger, I think, than the Star Destroyer.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah.
And also, blockade runner was originally the Millennium Falcon, if I remember right.
Correct. Yeah. They decided against that because it looked too much like the ship from Space 1999.
This is a good one. In Temple of Doom, what everyday food item was used to create the look of chilled monkey brain?
I don't know. I'm going to say avocado.
It was raspberry custard.
Oh, was it? I thought they might have coloured some avocado. Raspberry custard.
And that's another thing. As a kid, I loved that scene, eating the gross food. It was just, that's so cool.
Yeah. I thought that was the best thing I'd ever seen when I saw it.
Like all the Raiders of the Lost Ark was, Temple of Doom was just like, it was so scary and gross and that. And as a kid, you just...
ripping out hearts and insects in your hair and all that,
Well, that's what the memes say. It's not Christmas until someone says Kalima and holds your heart. All right. And the final question. I usually forget this one. It's just not related to us, but would you ever consider coming up to the Hebrides to visit our convention?
Oh yeah, that sounds cool. Do you know, I was saying to you before we started recording that, I traveled the world for 20 years working for Formula One. So I've been to Australia 19 times, but I've only been to Scotland 3 times, I think. So, and I've not been to much of Ireland as well. So yeah, I'd love to see more. And yeah, you have a festival?
We have our own little convention up here.
Oh, convention.
There's also there's also the Heb Celt Fest during summertime.
Right. Cool.
That's a music festival. We have our own little Comic-Con up here. This podcast's like an offshoot of the Comic-Con.
Nice.
So the OH is out at Hebrides, and we have OCon and OCast. So yeah,
nice,
clever,
nice.
Huh?
Very good, very good. It's more catchy than my name. Yeah.
All right, Kieran, final thoughts there.
I mean, if I managed to collect them all together. No, I quite enjoyed it. It's always fascinating just to kind of like learn everything that's like behind the scenes. I've watched quite a few behind the scenes and making of all these different films on like, the ones that you find on Netflix and all that. But it's just more endearing to know that there's someone who's digging further in and just learning about the stuff that no one else does, and just like like mentioned before, the back what you call it? The extras. I should know this word because I used to be one myself. All the extras just giving their own little tidbits and information and their experiences on sets, and just these little bits of information that you just glean is quite wonderful.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, I enjoy it. Listen, I still enjoy it. It's like we were saying, if it gets to the point where it feels like a grind, you got to kind of stop at that point. But what am I? With the podcast, I'm 142 episodes in now, 2 a month for the last 5 and a bit years.
Yeah.
And still enjoying it. I've got some great guests coming up this year.
All right.
So check it out, folks. The Filmumentaries podcast. That was my plug.
I was going to ask you to plug yourself. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you all very soon. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and go and listen to Jamie's podcast and send him some love as well. Right, thank you, everyone, for listening. Good night.
All right.
Thanks.